All right, hello, those entering the Zoom room. My name is Morgan, and I'm an event coordinator with Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. So before we begin this evening, we have our partner guests with us. We partnered with the Mahari Sekor Gallery here in Washington, DC, and we'll hear a word from their manager and curator, Chioma Abajari.
Hello and good evening, everyone. And thank you all for joining us to discuss Tina Campt's new book tonight. As I mentioned, my name is Chioma Abajari, and I'm currently manager and curator at Mahari Sekor Gallery, located in the H Street corridor of Washington, DC. We are an independent art gallery that's dedicated to articulating the narratives of the African diaspora by examining the world through contemporary art. And since 2019, we've championed a range of established, emerging, and international artists who embrace artistic freedoms across various mediums. And with a focus on women-identified artists, our gallery also serves as a hub for art scholars who interrogate the influence of Black arts and culture across hemispheres, which is why we're very excited to partner with Politics and Prose on this event tonight. And as a gallery, we're committed to promoting new artistic expressions, innovation, and fostering interactive art experiences. And we do have some very exciting programming coming up. First is our virtual screening of Paris is Burning, which will be released on August 25th. Working with Janus Films to stream this on our website for 7 days. The film explores queer life and leisure and the growth of voguing ballroom dance culture and drag in the 1980s. And you can find that on our website starting August 25th, and that's at maharisekorgallery.com. In the meantime, our exhibition catalogs from previous shows, including our most recent Derivatives, Memory, and the Mundane by Shan Wallace. Those and other catalogs will be available on our website. And these catalogs offer an in-depth look at the artist's inspiration, technical background, and the cultural relevance of their work today. There you can also access our virtual viewing rooms to walk through the show from your phone or computer as well. And to stay updated on our upcoming exhibitions, which we do have one opening in September, which we're very excited about, that and other programming, feel free to sign up for our newsletter, which you can access on our website, and also check out our Instagram as well, which we post many updates, including our Silkwar Sunday series, which offers bite-sized art history lessons every Sunday, right from your Instagram feed. And that's at Mahari Sekor, which is SEQUAR Gallery on all platforms. And thank you all so much for joining, and thank you to Politics and Prose for partnering on this event. We really appreciate it. And one question for Kimberly and Tina before I go, which is, how would you define Black art?
Wow. I want Kimberly, who is the co-editor of Black Futures, who has been pondering this question. I want you to go first.
Happily. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here on a Tuesday evening on your computers, here with us digitally, taking in all this beautiful information. I love that question because it is always a trick question, and I think it is so well suited for this text. I think of Black art in that construct as a labor force and an industry around the expression and preservation of Black ideas. But I think one of the things that this book does really well, and we'll get into in the conversation, is thinking about Black art in relationship to, and then also not necessarily just about the author, if that makes sense. I think sometimes we get really lost in these questions of ownership, these questions of, power and construction, and really it's something that's a bit further away from all of us. And so when I think about Black art, I think about the history of Black art as a history of representation, but then also every single registrar, curator, thinker, photographer, whomever who comes together, or the work that you do at the gallery that comes together to make Black cultural production a possibility for now and forever.
You set me up really nicely, because to me, Black art is really about a relationship. It's about defining a relationship to Blackness and defining a relationship to art. And how do you position yourself in between those two definitions? Where do they intersect? So that Black art is not necessarily about Blackness. It's about your relationship to Blackness and your relationship to art. So once again, I'm trying to move beyond a notion of identity, right? Or there can be moments of identification, but the most important thing is defining what your relationship is from whatever position you are approaching it, right? So is it about how do you see Blackness? How do you position yourself in relationship to Blackness? And how does art speak to that positioning? So I want it to be an open-ended question, but I also want it to be an open-ended question that demands a certain kind of labor, work, which is what my book's about.
Thank you, Chioma, for telling us about the gallery and opening with that question. So let me hurry up through the rest of this intro. For the audience, you can ask our speakers tonight a question using the Q&A box below. We apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. There are also auto captions for this event. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you can turn them off and on there. And let me introduce tonight's guests. Tina M. Campt is a Black feminist theorist of visual culture and contemporary art, the Owen F. Walker Professor of Humanities and Modern Culture and Media at Brown University, and a research associate at the VAD at the University of Johannesburg. She is the author of Image Matters, Archive Photography, and the African Diaspora in Europe, Listening to Images. Let me also mention that tonight's book that we're actually talking about is A Black Gaze, Artists Changing How We See. Campt will be in conversation with Kimberly Drew, a writer, curator, and arts advocate. Inspired by Toni Morrison's The Black Book, Drew is the editor of an anthology with Jenna Wortham titled Black Futures, which examines how creativity relates to Black cultural identity in the age of social media. Additionally, she is the author of This Is What I Know About Art, part of the Pocket Change Collective series. Let's give tonight's guests a virtual round of applause.
Hi, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I see that we still have people rolling in. I want to extend again a note of gratitude to all of you, because you could be spending your Tuesday evening in any way, shape, or form, or a Tuesday morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. And it is always such a pleasure to be able to talk about art and ideas and whatever kind of program necessitates that opportunity. I feel like this book is so much about proximity and viewership and audience and community. And in this moment, we're holding each other. And so I want to start with that gratitude. Also, before we begin, I want to set the stage a bit for this text and its interest in both images and how they find us. This evening, I want to go through the motions or verses of this text, but I also want to spend time with the labor and force of this book. Not only from the artist, which it focuses on, including Arthur Jafa, Deana Lawson, Dawoud Bey, Jen Kiru, Okwui Okpakwasili, Luke Willis Thompson, Simone Leigh, and so many others, the fam, we love them, but also some of the scholars that it highlights and brings into the room, including Huey Copeland, Christina Sharp, who, if you haven't read In the Wake, please do, Nicole Seeley, and so many more. This is a book about finding adjacencies, but it is also a book about what is sacred in the distance between each of us. It is a book that spans across identity and the vast expanse of Blackness and Black culture. A book about the haptics of images, but also about stillness. Soon, Tina will read an excerpt from the book, so you are all in for a treat. I am so excited. But I also want to acknowledge, of course, some of the difficulties of not only this book, but this moment. There's so much to mourn. There are so many ways that each day we are feeling increasingly more disenfranchised and disempowered by the powers that be and shifts in the world, whether that's a natural disaster, governments collapsing. There's so much to mourn in this moment. And I feel like it would be remiss not to acknowledge some of those things, even if vaguely. But I just want to hold that together because this is a book that reminds us all to be witnesses to each other as friends, as family, as writers, as scholars, as artists, as archivists. This is a book that I think gives a new sense of a type of agency that I think is really valuable in this time, not only to be curious, but also to do the work of invitation, to do the work that Campt so eloquently describes as feeling across our differences rather than feeling with or for someone else. This is a book about the labor of feeling, and I hope that this will be a conversation that extends that work as well.
Oh, Kimberly, thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. I think you're absolutely right to bring into the room what we are experiencing right now, the kind of cataclysmic convergence of so many forms of pain. So thank you so much for speaking that into this particular space. Thank you, Politics and Prose. Thank you from Mahara Sikwar Gallery. Thank you for my dog who is trying to respond to all of the things that you just said. She's become world famous all over the place. But what I want to do to start out this conversation, because it's really, really a conversation, I did not want to read this book in a, the normal way in which a book reading happens, because this book is really about a conversation. It's about an invitation to think together and an invitation to respond. And so to get that conversation started, I want to read a really short excerpt that is from the introduction to the book, which is called A Prelude to a Black Gaze. And it's a prelude because, as Kimberly mentioned, the structure of the book is really a series of verses that are trying to express art rather than tell you what to think about art. So this prelude is a section where I talk about a short video made by the filmmaker whose work initially inspired me to write about a Black gaze in the first place, and that is Arthur Jafa. And it's a video that many of you will be familiar with because it's a video for the song 444 by Jay-Z. So I'm just going to launch into it. A silent serenade between Jay-Z and Beyonce, live on stage, singing, serenading, flirting. It's sassy, it's sensual. She teases, he taunts, they both tantalize. She loves it, and he clearly loves her for it, and we're captivated by their exchange of glances and smiles. Her twirls around and around him, layered over the sweet signature whisper of Al Green cooing his love song, Come Lullaby, Judy. The footage is grainy, but its texture has nothing to do with age. Its grain comes from its visual frequency, which filmmakers, editors, and cinematographers commonly refer to as frame rate. In this case, it is an intentionally slowed frame rate that reveals the tender relations of both the scene and its subjects. This grainy slow motion clip gives an intimate framing to one of the most public Black couples on the planet. The sequence spans only a few seconds, though it feels far longer. Then it erupts to inject live concert audio of call and response exchanges with Queen Bee, stoking the audience's collective refrain. But this tantalizing scene is preceded by shattering footage. Film footage culled from Birth of a Nation toggles between cell phone footage of a Black man being beaten by a scrum of white police and CCTV footage showing a car mowing down Black bystanders in a parking lot. Interwoven amongst them is additional footage, cell phone video captured by ordinary people of street scenes, parties, and dancers, drawn from an endless archive of found footage posted on various online sites. A different cell phone video captures a prepubescent boy belting out the opening lines of Nina Simone's signature rendition of Feelin' Good, with the vibrato of a 60-something blues singer from the backseat of a moving vehicle. It transitions to hyperpixelated footage of Eartha Kitt, mid-soliloquy, waxing characteristically defiant, poetic, and dismissive of love and relationships. Silent portraits of two Black feminist theorists flicker briefly between these and other unlikely scenes, leaving unanswered questions in their lingering shadows. And a bleached blonde Black man filmed against a blindingly white background bears witness to hearing the voice of the Almighty speak to him in the moment of his temporary death after taking a bullet. He recounts his reflections with the wisdom of a shaman and the charm of a playa. The video for Jay-Z's 444 is chock full of love and loss, beauty and brutality, Black pleasure and Black precarity. Although produced as a visual and commercial vehicle for the song, the video is in no way beholden to it. It is a work that inverts the relationship between image and song by transforming the music into a vehicle for the astonishing montage of images created by Arthur Jafa and the T-Neg Collective. It coalesces around a series of visual duets that intertwine pleasure and despair and juxtapose the extremities of Black life in the 21st century. We see these extremities through the intentionally grainy frame of Jafa's cinematic lens. It is a grain that emerges when the diminutive frame of a cell phone video is expanded to a much larger screen. But it's also a grain that we feel as much as we see it. We feel the rough, unfocused grain by zooming in for a close-up on a cell or a CCTV footage of a beating or a drive-by. We feel the grain of a zoom in that allows us to appreciate the artistry of an impromptu subway performance, an improvised dance at a party, or a backseat solo performance. We feel it in the halo-like blur that results when a master cinematographer shows us the power of the everyday visualizing practices of ordinary Black folks' quote unquote amateur videos. They're videos that allow us to see ourselves as discerning and uncompromising witnesses who adamantly refuse to look away. 444 whiplashes us between giggles and gasps, winces and sighs, yet what weaves the emotional extremes of this 8-minute collage together and connects the mosaic of clips it gathers to the lyrical apology Jay-Z professes in the song is a breathtaking physical duet created by the coordinated sinews of muscle and flesh of two extraordinary movement artists, acclaimed flex dancer Storyboard P and MacArthur award-winning movement artist Okwui Okpakwasili. The two did not rehearse prior to the take included in the video. They were asked instead to dance simultaneously in tandem. What emerges is an organic symbiosis and a spontaneous interaction. They never touch, but there's contact nonetheless. The correlation of their bodies is something more than a dance and more than a choreography. It's a corporeal negotiation of intimacy and distance, tenderness, tension, and rage. Storyboard and Okwui Okpakwasili's fleshly improvisation mirrors the emotional apology that is the dominating lyric of 444. Placed in the context of the larger stream of visual duets it gathers, the video offers a different kind of mirror. It is a mirror on Black sociality. It is a mirror that reflects and refracts an uncomfortable portrait of Black life in the US at a moment when its most stunning and honest visualizations are those that twin the joys of the Black quotidian with the pain of Black precarity. The video captures Okpakwasili running languidly, then fluidly, at times seeming as if she's about to launch into flight. But most of the time she remains in place, vibrating intensely. Her body ripples, her neck rolls. She appears to rotate on her own axis. She undulates at a distance from storyboard, then grazes him closely. She turns away, then faces off in a confrontation that pivots back and forth between aggression and intimacy, conflict and vulnerability, apprehension and deep affection. As storyboard passes behind, alongside, or in front of her, the motion of his body suspends time and seems to deny the physics of the corporeal relationship between skeleton and flesh. He moves neither vertically nor horizontally. His body flows like a viscous material that mediates solid and liquid. He flows, she flows, and as I argue in the chapters that will follow, Black flow is creating a radical Black gaze. Or put another way, we flow. Watching 444 isn't easy. It doesn't tell a story. It narrates neither the lyric of the song nor the sexy hip hop life of bubbles and bling. You have to work to understand the connections between its various clips and sequences. I get goosebumps listening to the vibrato of that young boy singing in the backseat of a car. It's chilling to watch a scene of a Black boy on an auction block culled from Birth of a Nation. It hurts to watch video footage of police officers' relentless abuse of a Black man spliced so seamlessly into clips of parties and concerts. And it's harrowing to watch a body bounce off the hood of a moving car careening around a corner, intentionally hitting a bystander. But 444 is a video we both want and need to see. Its beauty and its power is that it requires us to be present. Watching it requires us to cycle through discomfort in order to appreciate its moments of sublime reverie. Reverie in Black love, in Black survival, and in a future we were never promised, yet claim and cling to vigorously and vociferously. It's a discomforting, aspirational, defiant gaze. It is a Black gaze. This book sketches the contours of this emergent Black gaze, focusing on a group of artists whose creative practice produces radical forms of witnessing that reject traditional ways of seeing Blackness, ways of seeing that historically depict Blackness only in a subordinate relation to whiteness. What defines and unites their divergent practices is their ability to make audiences work. They refuse to create spectators, as it's neither easy nor possible to passively consume their art. Their work requires labor, the labor of discomfort, feeling, positioning, and repositioning, and it solicits visceral responses to the visualization of Black precarity. A Black gaze asks us to consider what kind of work these artists ask us to do and what kind of labor it requires of us. Posing these questions means asking what is at stake in their work, as well as what are the stakes of creating this particular kind of art. My answer is that these artworks demand a different kind of response, or more precisely, a particular kind of responsiveness. They insist that we actively inhabit a state ranging from disorientation to unease to implication and vulnerability, and that we work through these responses to come out somewhere new and important. They demand a recognition that we are implicated in the precarity of Black life in the contemporary moment. In embracing or refusing this implication, we're faced with a choice: act or be complicit. It's a recognition that requires us to develop a different way of engaging art by way of a Black gaze that mandates our participation in and interaction with the social and political questions these works raise in ways that leave us vulnerable to their effects and better off for it. Thanks.
You didn't want to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for sharing from the book and for that framework of where we are. One of the things that I think really sticks out to me throughout the narrative arc of the book is this conversation around labor and the requirement and the showing up of a viewer, of an audience. And I want to start in the simplest place, which is really why make this book, why make it now? I think one of the conversations that so many are having in this moment is a conversation around an idea of compassion fatigue, where there are so many like missiles firing on every kind of drum, and people don't know how or where or why to situate themselves. And I wonder, in sharing this book in this contemporary moment, what are some of the things that that feel important for anyone who encounters this text or in the images that you present?
God, that's such a smart question. Compassion fatigue is exactly what I'm trying to argue against, because compassion fatigue in a lot of ways gets you off the hook, right? Because you get to go to, I feel so sorry for you, or you get to go through, I feel your pain, right? And one of the things that I want us to linger in is the discomfort of knowing you may not feel somebody else's pain, right? You may, and your sympathy, right? Or your pity, and there's a fine line between the two of them, right? May not address or be appropriate to the situation. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in the book is trying to get people beyond that. And I mean, again, it's a kind of, it's a contradiction in terms, compassion fatigue, right? If you really feel it, how can you be tired of it? Because compassion is actually an intense feeling that is, if you feel it, sincere, right? It is sincere, it is involuntary, right? It is a form of accountability. So I'm trying to dislodge those two things from the what gives you the right to be tired of it, right? When there is ongoing pain and suffering. And at the same time, what keeps you in that space of only compassion? Why can't you move beyond it? And so being able to assemble all of these different artists and their work together, what I'm trying to do is provoke us to go back to the moment before we called it fatigue, right? In that moment when it was something that we needed to actually recognize and reckon with, right? I want to make it into something active. And the reason that I've done it is because I felt myself in that place in relationship to all of these works. And it was work for me to move beyond this thing that people are labeling as something that is exhausting, right? There's a lot of things to be exhausted about, but not feeling, right? We can't not feel. We have to actually mobilize those intense responses and direct them someplace generative, productive, and a place that moves us forward.
Mm-hmm. I think you referenced Solange in the book as well, but it makes me think of her saying, "You've got the right to be mad." All these tensions and invitations to feel, to find the space for empathy, to figure out how to participate in a way. I feel like this is such a time where so many people don't know if they're overstepping or if they're doing too much, or they would have voted for Obama a third time. Like there are all these kind of tensions operating at once in this moment of a hyper visibility, a very strange kind of stillness, which you also articulate through the book, that isn't a stillness for everyone. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and you started to talk about it, is the labor that you did in this book. There's so many moments in your description of these works where I feel like I'm sitting with you in Berlin. I can feel the heat on my back. I can hear projectors clicking. And it is such, I don't even know what the right word is, but the way that you situate in a space is so elegant and so elegantly described. And I wonder if you could talk about your decision to write through the labor of looking in this book, because you do spend a lot of time in each intricate detail. And I don't think it's just for illustration's sake. It really is this kind of documentation of how you are a body in space. And I just wanted to ask you about what it was like to work through those things, to revisit those moments, and why you wanted to bring us into that.
You know, I wanted to, I needed to do that. I needed to do, to describe that. And it's less a narrative strategy than it is a critical practice, an embodied practice of putting yourself in relationship to a work of art. And it's part of the embodied sensory practice that I have for engaging any kind of visual, sonic, embodied form of art, which is that I feel that there's so much that we miss if we focus only on the sensory interaction of seeing. That there is a responsiveness that is a full body experience. It's about hearing, it's about feeling, it's about touching. And to create that, or to recreate the moments when I was taking in the full impact of a particular work of art, is to go beyond describing that work, is to actually set the scene in which my body received that particular response. And those responses were conditioned by a heat wave in Berlin, right? A heat wave in Berlin, and waves of heat coming at you, and not wanting to be in that space because there's no flow of air whatsoever, but at the same time being arrested by the work itself. And to really account for the spaces in which we see art. Because as much as gallerists, curators want to control that space and control that interaction, they can't. They can't, because we bring different things into the room. We bring things like weather. We bring things like, the current events of a moment. We bring our emotions and our senses into the room with us. And I'm actually inviting folks to let that happen, let that amplify your exchange with a piece of art, and to take notice of what it does to you, how it opens you up to stuff that you may or may not have let yourself feel without it, and to use that as a conduit into a broader way of thinking about our place in the world. So it's really about, what is the practice of engaging art as opposed to what you see.
Because it's not like a pop quiz.
Yes.
I think so many times I've had conversations with so many people about the act of viewing, the act of situating ourselves alongside culture. And there's so many conversations about worthiness, right? There's so many conversations about our invitation to participate, which I think is embedded in this as well. It's that confrontation, and also, especially from a Black perspective, being able to privilege our proximity to images and ideas, I think, is often lost in these discourses. And that can look in many different ways. I was thinking about one of the last shows that I saw was Lorraine O'Grady's fantastic retrospective at the Brooklyn Museum. And it was one of the first times in this COVID context, this ongoing pandemic, that I actually got to sit with work. And I stole off from a group of friends who were there viewing the show. And I just had this very embodied experience where I just stomped and clapped because I saw this work that I love, and it was just this very Black moment, it was just I could feel my enlightened ancestors looking over me, but I was like, I'm here with my girl Lorraine, and we're in this moment. It is, I appreciated those moments of articulation, whether that was you sitting on Deana's floor, and really sitting, because I think that the choreography is something that people overconsume themselves with, because there is a particular way to look, a particular way to sit alongside. And I think that there's a lot of breaking and inviting that you do in this book, even in calling it a Black gaze. I want to talk to you as well about choosing the framework of gaze, because in so many conversations about visibility and gaze, it is almost always constructed from the lens of a colonial kind of impulse, from the lens of whiteness, and then visibility being this double-edged sword, right? Is it a conversation about surveillance? What does it mean? I know in a lot of colloquial spaces, people say oh, so-and-so is invited to the cookout. What does it mean to bring people proximate to these Black ideas? But then also, as you're describing in the book, to make that labor happen too. Sorry, there's a lot of words in there. My brain
There's a whole lot there.
I had my script, and then now I'm just like riffing off of what you just said because you're so brilliant. But I wonder about the naming, thinking about gaze. Let's start there. Yes.
Yeah. No, I love a good freestyle. So you go with that. That's what we plan to do. Yeah, I mean, there is a certain kind of labor that I took on in invoking the gaze, which is the work to convince people that it is okay for Black folk to actually claim that. And I went back and forth, and there have been many conversations that I've had with, close friends, with people who are collaborators or colleagues about like, why the gaze? Isn't that a term that we don't need to claim that, right? What does it mean that you want to do that? And there is a form of agency that I want to claim, and a way in which I don't want to relinquish a term ever, ever. I want to be able to invest that term with a power that we can own, and invest it with a power that looks different than that which has been exercised upon us. I mean, the other thing about it is, the flip side about that, or the sort of supplement to that statement is, I believe in Black folks invoking power. And to talk about a look it does not have the same resonance. It does not compete. It is always going to be a differential relationship of adversity. And so there was a way in which I really wanted us to stake out a territory that was not defensive, right? That wasn't about resistance to an overwhelming presence, but is about a kind of initiative that we are able to invest, right? At the same time, part of the work that I did was to actually look at how the gaze has been invoked, and look at the way in which it's actually been evacuated to this very, very narrow understanding of it. And that there, even before it was invoked, in this classical sense of an oppressive gaze, right? It had multiple meanings. So why not go back and take those as opposed to the ones that are right there and that we are assuming are dominant? The other reason that I felt like I needed to name it in this way was, quite frankly, the power of the work itself. And it wasn't appropriate to talk about the ways in which the power of the responses that I was encountering, and not simply my own, but among other people, because at a certain point, this work became ethnographic. It started with my own response, but I started looking at and watching other people responding the way I did. And I started talking to them. And what they were talking about is a transformative way of seeing that was solicited, inspired, impelled by the work that they were encountering. So I wanted to be able to capture that power. And a Black gaze was something that, no matter if you agree or not, somebody's going to stop and listen to you, right? They're going to stop, they're going to listen, they're going to want to understand, you're going to make your case. And it is that kind of provocation. And that is my hope, that even those who think that it's preposterous, right, will sit down and think about what that might mean and what the implications of it, right? What might shift in thinking through it.
Yes. And I love it, because I wanted to circle back, because I was talking about like cookout invitations, because it's been one of the greater pet peeves of my life. And the conversation about the almost sanctity of Black culture. Conversations, of course, around cultural appropriation versus appreciation, which I find to make me feel dizzy. but there is this middle place that you find in your book that is almost bigger than those almost terrestrial questions.
What
You
do you
know,
mean?
I think in many ways that there's this, there is a way that the generosity that you provide in thinking about all of the ways that people can interact with these works almost like eviscerates the question of exactly who you are, because it's bigger than you, if that makes sense. I think in many ways it is about not privileging a particular type of audience or viewer or a sensitivity reader as exists in publishing, and think so much more about the work itself, which is the point. And I think for so many artists, and I wanted to ask you about this as well, for so many, especially, I don't know if it's an age thing, but I think in many moments in MFA programs and BFA programs, Black artists, emerging Black artists, are encouraged to be very careful with the ways in which they deal with Black culture, Black identity, and whether that's as a representational artist or as an abstract artist, you're caught in this tension between being too Black or not Black enough. And I wonder, especially because I'm sure in this group that we have here today, there is a mixture of people who are workers and makers and doers. In the context of the Black gaze, I wonder how you respond to those kinds of queries and those pressures that I think many of us are experiencing today, especially in what feels like this last year of people being like, oh, wow, Black people matter.
Well, I'm drawn to people who aren't careful. I'm drawn to the messy. The messy pushes us beyond our comfort level, and being able to move beyond our comfort level is the only way that we reach any form of transformation, right? So all of the artists that I write about are artists who have been cautioned, right? To respect the limits of their medium, who have been disciplined, right? When they went beyond it, who have been isolated because they did. And so even though there's a sort of a range of ages of the artists that I write about, from young artists, emerging artists to, extraordinary accomplished artists, the arc of their experience is really profound because it's young artists taking the chances that, established artists, took long ago and had to overcome to get where they are, right? And so there's a way that I want to offer these artists work. And I mean, that's another thing, is that I was very fortunate enough to encounter some of this work before it became established. And over the course of writing it, to see how their careers or the work itself has been embraced and taken off, has been an honor. But the other thing about it is that one of the most important things about a Black gaze that I'm trying to say right now is that some of the most troubling work right now, not troubling in terms of it being necessarily problematic, but some of the work that makes people most uncomfortable, right, is the work that is being the most lauded and awarded at the present time. And that's important to think about, because the art world has never been courageous, right? Artists are courageous, but the art world has been very conservative. And we're in a moment in time when people are taking risks, and those risks are being recognized for their quality. And so that says something about the moment. It says something about the art world, but it also says something about what it means to take chances with your art and to actually be rewarded in that process. Yeah, and so I really do feel that I'm hoping that one of the things about the multiple audiences that you're describing, who I would love to engage this book, that I'm hoping that it's both encouraging and solicitous of those who write to think about writing differently, and that it's solicitous and encouraging to artists to be able to see the way in the chances that other artists take, and the potential reward, but also the potential sanctions that ensue, and to be able to make that choice based on something other than success, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I was in the back of my mind, I was like, yes, getting off of this axis of success or failure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to find these other frequencies, these other vibrations, to trust, I mean, I know too, with like, even with Love is the Message, like there wasn't always the intention to share it. And it was that relationship with Khalil who was like pushing. And I think, yeah, there is also so much too. And I know that we're running low on time now. But your relationships in this book are so elegant and so tender. And you hinted about it a bit, and being able to see a lot of these works before they came into their current public forms. But I wonder for you, either through narrative or through how you were trying to construct your criticism, what it meant for you to work alongside these artists, because there is this like distinct way that you don't tell too many secrets, or you don't like over, try to say like, oh, this, there is this real delicacy through which you are able to invite and show and display this love without, I don't know how to describe it, but there is like this way that you there's an agency that you're exerting in your practice of care for these artists. And I wonder if you could talk about that as part of your writing process.
I think what you were trying to say is I don't overshare.
Yes.
I try never to overshare. But that is about respect. I respect the artist as much as I respect the person, but I privilege the person over the artist, because I feel incredibly privileged to have gotten to meet the artists that I write about. And and one of the things that in writing this book, there was a choice. Am I writing about the artist or am I writing about the work? And I'm writing about the artist. I mean, the work. I'm writing about the work. I love the artists, but I want to honor their work. And so there's a fine, the other part about that choice was I couldn't erase myself from the encounter with the art. And that was enhanced by friendships that developed through the work, right? They didn't precede the work. I encountered the work first. And then out of that emerged relationships. And I respect them deeply. But there is a kind of accountability too. And I think that is different than art criticism, right? Art criticism is actually to extract yourself from the work and just to talk about it as an object or talk about it as part of a lineage. But I was very interested in trying to take account for my learning process through the artwork, and to be able to walk myself and the reader through that process, because it wasn't just about me. And maybe I was making a particular kind of assumption there, about my capacity to inhabit a position that other people are also inhabiting. But I don't think of myself as singular in any way, shape, or form in terms of the responses that I have to the work. And I have always, in all of my work, been very careful to be accountable to the work itself. And so that's one of the things that I'm actually trying to be accountable to, is the relationships to the artwork, as well as those that emerged from meeting those artists and bringing that into the world. Because very often you either have work that's about artists or about the work, but rarely about both in a way that's respectful of both.
Mm-hmm. Or about the time that is spent alongside these, these cultural moments as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yes, it's about respect. I mean, it's about self-respect too, self-regard, even having your sides about, respecting Black feminist labor. I think is so astute and so important, because oftentimes too, I think in the context of an art world, of academia, there are so many Black women who have done the work of pulling all of these things together for culling us, for raising us, for building these foundations. And if we don't take the time to privilege the way that we see and hold each other, we're losing the plot, you know?
Yes, yes. And I mean, that's exactly it. Is part of it is recognizing those who came before you, right? And holding the door open for everybody who wants to come with you. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage us to do both at the same time. Standing on that threshold between those who made that door possible for you to pass and those who are with you and behind you.
Were there any moments in the construction of this book where you felt like you were taking a big risk? Because I think one of the things that I really love as a person who is not like of an academic track is how legible this book is. And I know that in academic circles that can be an insult, but it is the highest praise. I think that there are these really incredible moments where you have asides to define a word to make sure that people understand exactly how this language and vocabulary is operating in its situation in this paragraph and in this book. For anyone who is watching, please know that this is a book that is really just excellently constructed. But it is also a book that's put out on an academic press. And I know that there's a whole set of like secret rules and regulations to how those things are constructed. And of course, you are a prolific writer and an educator, and you have a role that is indelible within our culture. But I wonder for you, was there ever a moment that you were like, did I go too far? Or is this, like what were some of the questions or maybe not insecurities, but some of the questions that were coming up for you as you were constructing this? Because it is very unique in its construction. And I think that that's something worth talking about as well.
You know, I have to recognize the fact that, you know, I am a tenured full professor at a university, an elite university, and that gives me a certain level of security. And at the same time, I should never take that security for granted, and I should use my powers for good. You know? And using my powers for good is to write the work that I want to write. And this book wanted to be written like this. And again, I want to be able to encourage others to write the book they want to write. I was also the beneficiary of extraordinary support through friends. My dear best friend, Saidia Hartman, who encouraged me to write the way I want to write. My agent, who saw this book as a bunch of messy essays, who said, there is a book here and you need to write in your own voice. And that was a huge moment of permission, of embracing your own voice. And by the time I got there, because I wrote this, I mean, to be perfectly honest, this book started as a series of blog posts, and where I was effortfully trying to write in my own voice, which was a huge hurdle. But once I got there, I thought, why have I been hiding behind another voice for so long? And getting other external permission was an extraordinary affirmation. So the risk was that the risk was not writing in what's not the structure or the form of writing. The risk was being wrong about what I was saying. But there again, one has to take the leap of faith. And that leap of faith is about sharing your work with others and being big enough to take the criticism. And that's what I learned is, you know, be big enough to take the criticism, not as defeat, but as something that is asking you to expand and explain. And explaining is never bad. Explaining is your key to the kingdom. Because all you do is you bring more people along board with you. You never alienate anybody by simply being clear about how you're writing, what you're saying, and what you mean. That's accountability.
Mhm. I love hearing you explain that because I started reading, I was like, this is Tina. I was like, this is as someone who's like trying to do the writing thing, I was like, oh yes, like it's nice to just like hold your ear to a book and be like, oh yes, this is a person. This is a momentum. And I think it's important for all of us to hear where it's like, yes, there are so many things that you have earned and deserve. And also it is scary as hell to let yourself be on the page in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have those opportunities all the time. The things that we're reading with, the things that we're engaging with, whether that's some academic committee or some, editor at some publication, there's so many barriers to our own voice. And I'm happy to round our questions out in that space, because I think that if there's anything that I hope people take away from this book is that, one, to think about the ways that we're seeing, of course, to look at all of these works, to take time with them, but also to understand and listen to that voice inside, and holding that to the light of truth, holding yourself accountable, and being ready for criticism as a process of growth as both a writer and a thinker and participant on this here earth. So we'll transition to some Q&A questions from the audience. And if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, please pop them in now. This is your moment. We have a question from an anonymous attendee that is about the cover of the book, which is a work that you write about in the book. And I wonder if you could talk just briefly about why you chose this particular image of all the images that you reference in the book as the cover.
I didn't choose it myself. The book designer suggested it. And as soon as she suggested it, Molly Seamus, she's a brilliant award-winning book designer. I'm very, very grateful to have had her on my side. But at the moment she suggested it, I was in love and thought, why didn't I suggest this? And the reason I think it is so stunningly beautiful is that it is blackness on blackness. Right? It is really about showing us the deep blacks through which blackness shines through. It is an image it's a still image from one of Arthur Jafa's films that I talk about. But I asked him for permission to use it, and he was delighted. And one of the things he did was he wanted to adjust the different tonalities of darkness within that image. And I think that Molly did a spectacular job of giving texture to, right, the black on black, a black face on a black background, in a way that challenges us to do a different kind of looking, to really be able to calibrate the relationship between different forms of darkness and different forms of light. So thank you for that question. It is a beautiful color. I wish I could take full credit for it, but I can't.
It is a village work to make a book. It is, the work of a group. And we have a question from another anonymous attendee that came in, and I'm going to slightly edit it. Will a non-Black reader get something different? Which is, I think the answer is obviously yes. But will a non-Black reader get something different from someone who is Black who is reading this book? And I think this is broadly a question about audience.
Yeah, and in terms of it being in terms of the audience question, there is no specific audience that it's directed to. I don't write books for a specific audience. I write books for everyone, and what you get from this book is not dependent upon whether you are Black or non-Black. It depends on whether or not you are willing, capable, ready, right, to think about how you're positioned in relationship to Blackness. It goes back to Chioma's question about what is Black art. And if Black art is a way of positioning oneself in relationship to Blackness and allowing art, right, to be that vehicle of positioning, then it is very specific to individuals and their relationship to their communities. So different, yes, but based on ethnicity or race, not sure. And that's an intentionally open, a question that's left intentionally open.
Yes. And I think in general, it's important to also acknowledge that we are all coming from all of these vast spaces. And there is something really generous in this book that isn't very didactic in how you should look, but really more about the process of looking, which I think is something that we're all going to have our own vantage points from.
Yeah.
We are at 7 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the interest of things that are good and just and fair, I just want to say thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting us. Tina, thank you for being yourself on the page, for answering these questions so generously. It is such a privilege to see this work come into the world, and I can't wait to tune in to many more conversations that you will be having soon enough about this book with our other brilliant friends. But I sit in so much gratitude for you for taking maybe not a risk, but taking a chance on writing through this and showing us how you see, and showing us how these artists are inviting us to see in a new way. I think it is a really poignant text for this time, and I'm happy that it exists.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's been such a delight to talk to you, and I look forward to so many more conversations and learning from you in so many ways. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And on behalf of Politics and Prose, I would like to thank you, Tina and Kimberly, for joining us this evening and taking time out your day to talk about your book, Tina, A Black Gaze. You all, those watching, can pick up a copy from Politics and Prose. The link is in the chat. I would also like to thank Chioma and the Mahari Sequoia Gallery for partnering with us in promoting this event. And if you're in the DC area, to please visit the gallery. I've been myself and it's great.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yes, everyone have a great night. Take care.